chat. So now on to the more important things. Earlier this year, AURP presented its Excalibur Award for Response and Resiliency to COVID-19 to the National Institutes for Innovation and Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals, known as NIMBLE, at the University of Delaware Tech Park, and its national consortium for providing a template for domestic manufacturing of needed drugs in the United States. On behalf of AURP Award Committee Chair and AURP Board Member Chris Carlson, we are pleased to now present the AURP Excalibur Award to BIO, the world's largest bio-trade association. Shortly after COVID-19 was identified as an international medical menace, on March 24th, BIO brought together 45 biotech innovators, government agencies, and leading academics to share information about their work to fight the coronavirus. Since that initial meeting, BIO has been at the forefront of providing a forum for companies and governments to share information and promote research. On behalf of AURP, I am pleased to present the Excalibur Award to BIO's new CEO and President, Dr. Michelle McMurry-Heath. Thank you, Dr. McMurry-Heath, for the work BIO and your members have been doing around the clock and around the world to help tame the pandemic and provide reassurance that science will lead the way and provide a cure. Thank you, Dr. Michelle McMurry-Heath.
Thank you so much for this lovely award. I'm sure you can see it. It's absolutely beautiful. And I shared it with the team at BIO this morning, and they were just delighted. So we really appreciate this recognition of our efforts. And I know that they've all been done in partnership with your many member organizations that have been really producing the science that is going to be the answer for our road to recovery from COVID. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And may I call you Michelle?
Of course.
Thank you, Michelle. AURP greatly appreciates its partnership with BIO. I'm certain our audience would like to know more about BIO and you and your background. So could you give us a little bit of background on your personal and academic career before you came to BIO as its president and CEO?
Sure, of course. So I've been in the science policy realm for about 20 years now, even over 20 years, time flies. But by background, I'm an MD PhD. I did my research on T-cell gene recombination, and I trained at Harvard, then at Duke, and trained in pediatrics, but soon really got interested in how the funding decisions were made behind science. At the time, it was the era of the doubling of the NIH budget, and there was a lot of political dialogue about the choices we were making as a society in terms of how to support science and which science we supported. So I came to DC doing a AAAS Science Policy Fellowship, working at the National Science Foundation for Dr. Rita Caldwell, another local hero, and really got to learn at her shoulders about science education and funding for science education, and I loved the opportunity. We spent a lot of time that year working on doubling graduate student stipends, which happened first in NSF and then later at NIH. So it was a very gratifying time to work. I returned back to the hospital and then got recruited to Capitol Hill for what I thought was going to be a year, but turned into 5 years working for Senator Lieberman, doing health, science, and social policy. And we really put together the first Democratic presidential campaign platform that was around biomedical innovation, not just around healthcare and universal access, which of course is very important as well, but about how we think about the promise of science to the many patients who are waiting on that science. Moved from there to the Aspen Institute, where I started the health section of that think tank. And while working on transition team for the Obama administration, got recruited to FDA, where I was Associate Center Director for Science in the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Worked a lot on patient preference, new methodologies, regulatory science, many terms that your members are quite familiar with. And after 5 years there, worked at J&J, leading regulatory and then regulatory clinical and preclinical for all the device companies. So it's been a long road, but I've gotten a chance to see industry, the executive branch, Capitol Hill, as well as the think tank world, and all in the vein of how do we deliver more cutting edge innovations to patients, particularly in vulnerable communities. So when Bio reached out about this opportunity, I thought, what a great synthesis of all of those experiences and a place to pull them together.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned Dr. Rita Colwell, because I worked with her at the University of Maryland, and she had an appointment also at Johns Hopkins in the School of Public Health, and she's been a great mentor to me over the years. So some of our members may not know as much about Bio as others. So can you talk a little bit about Bio? I know it now stands for the Bio Innovation Organization. It originally was the Bio Industry Organization, and I think that evidences the shift of how science and technology happens in our parks and happens amongst your science colleagues. Can you talk a little bit about how big is Bio and how you've been growing?
Sure. So that was a very important shift in the nomenclature from the Biotechnology Industry Organization about 3 or 4 years back to the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. And it was in recognition of the fact that while Bio has 1,000 members, the vast majority of which are biotechnology companies, we actually have a lot of other members as well, including university members. And so we really cut across all of the places in which science and biotechnology is really moving the needle. We cover not just the healthcare part of biopharma, but also food and agriculture, industrial and environment, every place where science is really integral to our progress. And so it's been a wonderful mixture of cultures that we bring together in Bio, and the common theme is advocating for these technological breakthroughs, the public acceptance of them, the speed of our development of them, and our ability to deliver them to patients and consumers. So while there's 1,000 members, about 95% of our company members are actually small companies, even though we include large companies as well. So that's a nice mix of the ecosystem as well. So not only the sectors vary, but also the size of the companies involved.
So you've been a leading spokesperson for the need for diversity and inclusion in the bio industry, society in general, and in our personal lives as well. Can you talk about your becoming CEO this past spring at the time of George Floyd's death and the impact this and other racial killings and social arrests in the U.S. And internationally have had on you and your views on that?
Sure. Well, I think it impacted all of us, really. This was just quite an unusual summer, to say the least. And it's been a trying time for our nation and our world. But it's also been a time for reflection and a time to think about what we can do to contribute to building our way back a little bit stronger than we have before. And so I came on board. I started at Bio June 1st, and the second week I was there, we had our International Bio Conference, and it was also the week of George Floyd's funeral. And it was just a very emblematic time of what can we do as an industry to help so many people who are struggling at this particular moment in time. So we've been very active on the COVID front, standing up for scientific integrity of our developmental processes in terms of getting COVID solutions out to patients. But in addition, we wanted to take a careful look at our industry and say, okay, what can we do to help diversify our ranks? And at the same time, how can we shine a spotlight on many of the great activities that our members have been undertaking for years to try to add diversity and to try to be more inclusive. And so it's not just about creating new, it's also about showing and highlighting the great progress that has been made to date. And one of the areas that we're really focused on in our bioequality agenda, which we launched a couple months later, is also trying to combat healthcare disparities and making sure that in clinical research, and this is an area that's probably of particular importance to your members, that we're doing everything we can to make sure that there's good representation and diversity in clinical trials going forward.
Yes, we will have a session. Leah Burton, our vice president, will be leading that on Thursday afternoon. So those of you who are listening on diversity and inclusion, make sure you tune into that session on Thursday. Tomorrow's election day. I don't need to tell all of you that. If you haven't voted yet, please vote tomorrow. So this gets back to some of your background. What impact will the Congress and President have on bio in the future? What should a new Congress do to support bio innovations and protect future pandemics? And obviously, patents and intellectual property also play a role in that. And we have a session on the Bayh-Dole Act later tomorrow, actually. I know that's important to bio, so can you just talk a little bit on the public policy side, regardless of the outcome of the election?
Yeah, well, I think we've definitely seen, in recent years, and not just with this administration, but with the last several, the huge impact that Washington, D.C. leadership can have on biomedical innovation. And so we want to make sure we do everything we can to support a very supportive atmosphere for the research that comes out of our universities and our companies. It's incredibly important. People are waiting on the solutions that our scientists are working on every day. And so we have to do everything we can to smooth the way. So part of what we've seen this summer is bio really standing up quite vocally in support of scientific experts within the federal government, also the integrity of the regulation process so that the public can have confidence in the scientific solutions that we produce. I'm a former FDA official, and so I completely have confidence in the Food and Drug Administration and the amazing expertise that they have there. And we want to make sure that the public does not lose that confidence. So there's a lot that the Congress and the existing administration or a new administration can do to support those organizations. We have the gold standard in the world in terms of the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Food and Drug Administration, and we should be protecting the integrity of those august institutions. There's also a lot to be done in terms of stimulating the great ideas and making sure that those ideas are translated from sometimes their university setting to company settings where they can really be taken across the finish line. By some estimates, the federal investment in most research projects that eventually turn into medicines is about 10% of the total developmental cost of those medicines that eventually are available to patients. And so we have to make sure that we continue to have that seamless integration between universities and companies to make sure that those ideas really get to the point where they're fully developed, fully fleshed out, tested and tried so that we know that they will work for patients. And that's really where that partnership between industry and universities is so key. So that has got to continue. We celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Bayh-Dole Act this year, which was so incredible. And, we recently just had a patient come and share her story, and she credits this piece of legislation with saving her life, that it allowed a therapy for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that was untreatable at the time, 18 years ago, and has now allowed her to have a normal lifespan. Those are the kinds of breakthroughs that we need to make sure our Congress keeps an eye on, because members of Congress do have an opportunity to change lives for the better, and we need to continue to give them the opportunities and show them the way.
So yes, we think our bioparks are ideal places where that academic, government, private industry can connect. We created something called the BioHealth Caucus because we've noticed the largest growth amongst our members has been in hospitals building innovation centers, precisely the kind of places where you can do that kind of synergies amongst those different groups. So thank you for that. What about marching rights? As you know, under the Bayh-Dole Act, in theory, the government can say if a drug is not being produced, can order that the drug be taken away from the inventor if it was invented with government money. So far, NIH has resisted that, but regardless of the outcome of the election tomorrow, there seems to be a push to address drug prices. What's Bio's view on all of that?
Yes, well, those are kind of two different themes because, the margin rights are really for very specific emergency situations and for a very finite period of time. And, if there were a situation in which that was deemed to be the right move, we, of course, would try to see what we could do to facilitate public access, even more public access than we already do. It's rarely needed, and it's usually not the case. I mean, it's been interesting to watch Operation Warp Speed this summer. Even when the federal government mobilizes its resources and targets its efforts, there is an undeniable need to partner with industry to really get medicines at work. The scientists that know how to turn these solutions into actual drugs is really within industry today. And so we have to really continue to have those strong partnerships because that's really the way we make things happen and make headway. But we have to look holistically at the cost of medications. And it's not just about the cost of the medications that are available today, but it's also about making sure that we don't shortchange the innovation that's coming tomorrow. Because we really want the full pipeline of solutions to come to patients, not just to give them access to what's available right now, because there's many diseases for which we do not have a good solution today, and there are many patients who are still waiting on scientific breakthroughs, and we have to make sure that those breakthroughs continue, and so we can't shortchange the future.
So what about the role of states? We heard earlier Jeff Galvin from ATC, who's developing a cure for AIDS, an actual cure, which is fantastic. I get so enthused whenever I hear him speak. And he is a big proponent because the state of Maryland has something called a biohealth investor tax credit. So it gives the state gives a investor that invests in biotech companies a credit, and even in this case, Montgomery County, Maryland, which has a lot of biotech companies, has a county tax credit. So clearly, it's not just the federal government, but states can help support the bio industry, and then they can also pass legislation that could help retard the bio industry. Can you talk a little bit about the roles of states in helping develop the bio community?
Yeah, well, states have a huge impact, and we only have to look at the differing states, the differing status of the bio industry in our different states to know that state policy can have a huge impact on incentivizing innovation. And we hope to do everything we can at Bio to help support that. So for example, you mentioned tax credits. Those can be incredibly important. And in some states like California right now, we're seeing a rollback of some of those advantages because of the budget shortfalls that the state is facing for COVID. And we're already starting to hear about the chilling impact that is having on the innovation that's based there today. And so it's critically important that states keep a long view about how to stimulate and encourage these innovators to grow their businesses in the state and remain in the state. It's so critically important. There's some other worrisome trends on the horizon as well. We're up to 5 states now who have said that they want to have a secondary state level review of any COVID vaccine that's produced. So you can imagine a tapestry in which we have 50 states with their own independent FDAs on top of a US FDA. And that could just have not only a huge time impact on the wait for new innovations, but also a huge cost factor as well. When I was at Johnson & Johnson, I was responsible for getting products on the market, not just me, but my team, in 152 countries. And it was sometimes a 7-year lag for the very same product to clear the gauntlet of all of those different regulatory systems. And so we have the world's gold standard of regulatory at the US FDA, and to put in secondary reviews in all of our states would just have a tremendous downward impact on innovation. So that's an area where we really have to be careful. But states are also doing a lot that really does stimulate growth. I had the chance to go to Novavax in Maryland not so long ago, and it's just it's so impressive to see how when states pour a concerted effort into making sure that they're not just educating the talent that's needed to staff these great growing companies, but also supporting the growth and development of these companies as well, what fruits you see. And so that's going to be very, very important. And we're seeing it across the country. There's lots of different research parks and research areas that are just blossoming under really tender, loving care from their state level officials.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, New York City is an example. They're building wet lab space out of, high rises. I grew up, was told you can never have wet lab space in a high rise, but New York City is building that and repurposing high rises with wet lab space and creating a lot of bio innovations like you have in Maryland, where I think there's $4 billion of warp speed funding, including Novavax you mentioned, in just as one county of Montgomery County in Maryland. So when I walked on the trade floor when bio was in person, it's amazing to see all these flags from other countries and how many other countries are part of the bio community. Because, I mean, science is very international. It's not a solitary effort. It's by definition international. So obviously there's been some trade tensions with China and some other countries. How does bio overcome those trade tensions to make sure we still have great science going on internationally?
Yes, well, international work is always a combination of diplomacy and careful and skilled negotiations, and bio tries to be right there at the table. We've been very involved with trade talks with China, getting, some protections in place for some of our agriculture-based biotechnology businesses and some of the early versions of a trade accord. So it's very important for bio to keep that international lens, because particularly in areas like agriculture, one country's view of the science can change what could be produced for the entire world. So it's very, very critically important that we have, that we try to reduce those trade barriers and that we pay close attention to unreasonable regulation as well. At the same time, we need to protect intellectual property. That is also critically important. That intellectual property, the value of that is really what drives the full development of the science all the way to products for patients and consumers. And so we can't have it infringed around the world. And so bio is very active on that front. But as you mentioned, bio has been engaged in the international front for quite some time. Usually about half of the participants at our international meetings are from OUS. And so it's just so refreshing to see that collaboration. And that collaboration has gone even further in the context of COVID, because we're now seeing collaborations across the globe that are not slowed by distance or time zones, but really out of necessity. People are partnering, large companies with small companies, academia with private sector, governments with nonprofits. And so you're seeing this huge concentration of effort that I hope continues even after we find the solutions for COVID.
So I'm glad you mentioned agriculture, because AURP member parks, we have parks in like UC Davis, world-class vet school, University of Nebraska, University of Arizona, Utah, Purdue, Illinois, Michigan State. I can't go through all of them, but agriculture is a big part of those states' economy. It's also a big part of their, innovation. And I know I've been reading, I get the bio update, and you've been doing a lot of work with USDA, which, regulates some part of bio, but not the FDA. I know from the FDA Center for Food Safety is in the University of Maryland Research Park. So I know that if the pizza has no meat on it, it's regulated by the FDA. If it has meat on it, it's regulated by the USDA. It seems like we may have a little bit of a divergent way of regulating ag bio, especially with GMOs and CRISPR and all of that. So can you talk a little bit about what bio is doing and what you think in terms of a coordinated approach to this kind of important technology?
Yeah, and we don't just cut through USDA and FDA and HHS. We also cover EPA as well because we have industry and environment. So,
Yeah.
it's very important to look at a rational approach to the science that cuts across all of the various regulatory agencies. We're getting to an era where CRISPR, a technology that just merited the Nobel Prize, is incredibly focused and sought after in the area of cancer, and yet we're seeing resistance to it in the agriculture setting. So, we had Peter Marks from the FDA at our board meeting last week, and he said, it's not rational to me to think that folks are tolerant of CRISPR to change their own genome, but not tolerant of CRISPR to change the genome of their corn. And so we really need to help educate the public about how these technologies are so promising for human health, but they can also be so promising for nutrition, for ending food deserts in inner cities, for making sure that our environment is cleaner tomorrow than it is today, that we end global warming. These are all things that are important, and we can't just restrict the technologies to a narrow segment of human medicine. We really need to think about how it can improve the world across the board. And that's a very important part of our newly unveiled bio strategic plan going forward, is making sure that we're standing up for the science in all of its iterations and all of its great uses.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys are looking at obviously CRISPR and GMOs and things like that, because I sort of, every time I see a non-GMO sticker, I kind of rebel in that. But so you talked a little bit about other medicines. So obviously a lot of emphasis has been on COVID-19, but clearly people are still dying of cancer, sickle cell anemia. How do we keep research, and Jeff Galvin is working on, HIV cure. So how do we keep those kinds of equally important research and technology going when there seems to be so much focus on COVID-19?
Well, that's the heroic thing about our joint members, is that the science never stops. The science keeps going, and our scientists remain completely committed to the intellectual discovery and to trying to find new solutions. And so it's just so admirable and so wonderful to support that type of dedication, that work. I think those of us who move in the science policy sphere can do everything we can to make sure that that is as uninterrupted as possible. So I know earlier this year there was a lot of work across the states to try to make sure that scientific research was considered essential work so that it did not slow down in the midst of the COVID crisis. And we're seeing a lot of great progress in our small companies, in our collaborations. What we do worry about from time to time is bandwidth in the regulatory sphere. It's very, very difficult for our federal partners and federal regulators to maintain that huge amount of concentration of effort across all of those various areas. We also see it in the ability to execute clinical trials. The clinical trial enrollment slowed down quite a bit initially. It's picked up to some extent because of the relaxation of some of the telemedicine regulations, and that's helped. But we aren't seeing the full breadth and speed of clinical trials that we had seen before. So I think the research is going strong, and that needs to continue, and we need to do everything we can to make sure it's not interrupted. But getting the final mile of clinical trials and regulatory approval, and sometimes even NIH support, that has been a little bit more challenging in the midst of COVID.
So I know there's been some early work on doing clinical trials remotely, with telehealth, and I'm not a scientist. I have no idea if that will ever work, but clearly there's also been a great emphasis on making sure clinical trials represent better people of color and, other sectors. So can you talk a little bit more, because you talked a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion. What is bio doing, for example, in helping make sure clinical trials are repurposed in a way that brings together a broader set of the population?
Yeah, so we have a combination of short-term efforts and long-term efforts. In the short term, we're trying to make sure that our researchers that are working in the COVID space, either on vaccines, antivirals, or therapies, have more help in diversifying their clinical trials. We know that COVID has shown quite a disproportionate impact on patients of color, and so we want to make sure that bio is helping make those connections between, organizations like the National Association of Black Churches and the National Urban League with the companies that are in that final stretch of doing their clinical trials for COVID. So that's an area of focus. More long term, though, we're trying to see what it will take to reconceptualize some of the incentives within clinical trials and maybe some of the structure around clinical trials to make it easier for a range of people to participate, because that's really key. It's not just about the minority enrollment in trials. It's about making it easy for any patient of any socioeconomic background easy for them to participate in clinical trials. And it's not always today. Telemedicine is helping, and I think it will help going forward. So part of what we're doing is also making sure that some of the flexibility that FDA is showing in the context of COVID gets translated to other therapeutic areas as FDA moves forward. So more to come on that, but trying everything we can and just raising awareness of how important it is as well.
So I'm raising the $64,000 question. Everyone listening here is probably thinking, when will we have a COVID-19 vaccine? And how long will it take to inoculate, enough of the population to tamp down COVID-19? I started reading, will we have enough refrigerator supply planes to, if in fact the vaccine requires refrigeration? So I know nobody knows, but can you just give us some sense of what you think we might have in terms of actionable vaccine and timelines?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we haven't changed our estimate over the last 4 or 5 months. We really think it's going to be spring of next year before you'll see a COVID vaccine in wide distribution. Now, of course, there may be emergency use authorizations before then. There might be pockets of individuals that get access. But in the day where you can call up your local doctor's office and get a COVID vaccine is probably going to be spring, maybe into summer of next year. The question of when enough people will be inoculated, that is really the $64,000 question. That is really one that's hard to predict. I can give a couple of clues. One is that it's been amazing to watch our companies, and there are 191 COVID vaccine development programs underway. You hear a lot about the 9 that are in late clinical development, but there are 109 attempts at this going on right now. 191 attempts at this going on right now. And a lot of our vaccine developers are also scaling up their manufacturing capacity and starting to manufacture doses at risk before they even know if their vaccine is going to be the 1 or 2 or 3 that works and is chosen. And so we're going to have a lot of doses on board when we do get to an eventual successful candidate. So that's very helpful. We're also seeing international efforts to start making sure that we've paid for doses for the most vulnerable parts of the world, so that it won't just be wealthy countries that get it, but also poorer countries will also have access to the vaccine. But now transporting the vaccine and getting it to the point of care for everyone who needs it is going to be a huge logistical challenge. Part of what makes me hopeful is that we do have several candidates that are stable at room temperature and that may only take 1 dose to be effective. I think that's going to be critical to reach every pocket of the globe.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that research advances quickly. Well, Michelle, thank you. This has been a great conversation. I see we've run out of time. How do people who just want to keep up on bio? I read bio daily, I think.
Yeah. So sign up for Good Day Bio.
Yes,
it's free at bio.org. If you don't know where to vote on tomorrow, you can also check out Biotech Votes 2020, which was Bio's first ever voter registration and Get Out the Vote campaign as well. And please check out the I Am Bio videos that really are vignettes about individual scientists and entrepreneurs and how they're changing the face of the world. So more to come.
Great. Thank you. That was a great conversation. And thank you, Bio. And we greatly appreciate providing the COVID award to you guys. And with that, we will say goodbye. And if we were in person, we would all clap. But